All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of O365A. In this episode, we have fellow MVP Richard Harbridge, who's a technology and ecosystem strategist with ShareGate, here to talk to us today about some security insights from ShareGate, some of the pain points and things and how to address them. So, welcome, Richard. Thanks for joining us on the show today. Maybe first start off with telling us a little bit about yourself, and then maybe let's just kind of get right into it.
Yeah, happy to do. I'm a Microsoft MVP of many years, and like all of us, there's never enough time to tackle everything. So, very excited to work in a company that builds tools that helps organizations with Microsoft 365 management, migrations, and things like that. At the same time, one of the things that's kind of exciting is we're all trying to get more information. So, one of the reports that I was a part of is called the State of Microsoft 365, and it was this survey with about 650 IT pros, and the idea was to gather, these are Microsoft 365 IT pros, like what's working, what's not, what are the pain points, and it's been coloring a little bit of my own planning this year, because a lot of times we can kind of feel like our challenges are unique to us, and then when you see that other people are having the same challenges, it feels a little bit better, which I know is a big focus for you guys. So yeah, when I'm not doing those types of things, I like to do my own little AI research work and some other stuff on the side. But today's all about Microsoft 365. Maybe what I'll do is I'll walk you guys through. This is the report. Anyone can go and retrieve it and download it yourself. I won't go through the report because it's pretty laborious. But one of the insights in the report that I thought was pretty interesting, in this report, very, very long report. But later on in the report, it basically talks about security. And there's this contrast between people who have, here, I'll show a slide for it to make it easier for everyone. So this is basically the chart in the report. These are the organizations and the people that are keeping data on-prem. So think of like SharePoint Server, specialized scenarios like that in the Microsoft 365 space. They still have their data on-prem because of data security and control. It's like the number one reason that people still do it. Yet the exact same people, these are these same people who respond to the survey, also say the number one reason that they're moving to Microsoft 365 is, again, security improvements, right? It's our number two, I guess, technically here. And so you get this really interesting conflict. And we've had this for years, right? It's not new, this idea of like, do we move to the cloud? Do we stay on-prem? But why I think this is particularly interesting today is that we're seeing new increased threats and attacks on that on-prem data. So a great example of this recently was those customers who are still running SharePoint 2016, 2019, those environments, they had a big attack. I'll show you the article just because, again, for those who are watching online, there's quite a bit to understand about all this. And in this article, Microsoft explained how they addressed it within two and a half days, technically, to eventually get the update for 2016, why the attack was a threat, how to look for the risks. So there's some really good stuff in, again, the article, maybe we can link it afterwards, around like how to check your own environment and security harden it based on this. As quite a few organizations, I won't say the numbers because I don't think it's public, but a lot of organizations that we work with had this issue. So it was quite prevalent, more than so than most of these types of attacks. And so, again, it took a bit of time. You can kind of see this is the official timeline in the Microsoft security blog. So it took like almost 2 days before, since initially the information was reported, to having the security patches. And then, of course, it takes, as we know, some people weeks or months even to be aware of the risk and then to go and patch their environments. And these are, pretty notable risks. So it's put this spotlight back on something that we've all been dealing with, which is, how do we get out of these SharePoint environments? And in the same report, in the report from ShareGate, those same users that said that, hey, security is the number one reason I'm staying, and arguably the number two / number one reason I'm going to the cloud, 66% of them still had SharePoint 2016 and 2019. So that's a large percentage of people that still have these environments that have a big risk and that need these things to be addressed. And again, brings up the question of maybe you are looking to do a lift and shift to SPSE. Well, SPSE is still that same threat, right? SPSE was patched first, so you get a little bit faster response time, but you're still responsible for that challenge, which I think is that, very salient point that we've recently run into again. So I thought that was like the first most interesting stat that might be relevant for a lot of the people watching this. Any comments on that before I go? I have another one on governance that I think kind of pairs well with this one.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's really interesting, seeing this, in looking at, some of the fundamentals around like the whole zero trust concept, right? Where it's like everybody used to have everything on-prem. They were desktops. All the access was from like one location and stuff like that. Where now, people can access the information from like all these different places, right? So like the risk is like the endpoint device where everything is connecting from now, right? And so with the cloud, I mean, obviously they're continually doing the updates and, ensuring that there's security, but now like I feel like you're mentioning that some of the on-prem people, obviously, yes, they want to keep on top of everything, but it becomes a lot more laborious to do that because there's so much that they have to manage on top of the security side of things. There's like all the infrastructure and all the other kind of stuff too. So it's kind of cool to see sort of like that abstract between them, right?
Absolutely. And that effort challenge, right? We many of us are tackling like AI enablement and transformation and all these things that are like really putting pressure on us. And then, things like patching and security is a hard thing to keep promoting as like top of mind and a priority. So these legacy environments can cause a lot of issues and conflicts. The other one that I always connect this to is governance, right? And these are broad terms, but we think of Microsoft 365 security, and we think, most of us, at least like myself, you think of like hardening the service. You think of like how you configure everything. You think of the containers, so like your sites, your teams, you think of those types of things. Then you start to think of the content. And historically, for the last X years, we didn't really talk about the content level, right? We were always talking about like, how do we secure the service? How do we use least privilege? How do we, make sure that we're organizing our sites? Those types of things made sense. We didn't want oversharing in sites and containers. But actually, one of the interesting things with AI is that it really puts the emphasis on this lower level because, like, as you guys know, with Copilot, the way it works is it's going to use like sensitivity labels. It's going to use those concepts of like what's protected at the document or data level. And if you don't have that document centric level, like if your governance or your security approach and posture is still at these higher levels, then you're missing a lot of opportunity here. So in the SharePoint on-prem attacks is a great example of really the service centric. It's like that like big broad discussion. But even if you move to Microsoft 365, it's not like the threat goes away. It's just different because now we're starting to think of how does data leak in the organization? Where does oversharing happen? Where do those things happen? And that really pushes this pressure and visibility on, where is our maturity? Are we at a good container level that, site sprawl, team sprawl, like we know how to manage that and we're securing it? Or are we finally at the document centric level where you could ask me a question like, what kind of contracts do we have and what level of labels are they auto applying in all these locations? And then we should be able to answer that. And that's a big challenge that IT has to tackle if they have to deal with this legacy debt, right, of a on-prem server environment that has its own complications. Then that's just going to take more and more of our time away from what really matters, which is moving forward with better governance, compliance, and security postures today. So I thought that was an interesting thing that we've been seeing. And when we asked people about that same thing, the way we phrased it was post-migration, because, the idea is like take those customers that are in that journey and where are they? If they've moved to Microsoft 365 recently, how's the governance on that workload? And what's that look like? And that's where we found, again, security number one, right? So the challenge people have after they move to the cloud, even if they're moving off of, say, SharePoint server, again, why are they doing it? They're doing it for security, right? They're doing it for these benefits, but it's the number one challenge because they still have to ensure proper security and access control and governance policies and a little bit of, sprawl management. And what surprised me a lot, actually the most surprising thing in the entire survey and research report was this. So you guys probably have your own opinions of this. I knew there's a lot of people who use manual policies for governance, like scripts, things we've all hacked together. But I was very surprised that the percentage of people on this survey wasn't higher for using a third-party tool. And the reason not because I work for an organization that does that now, but because, just a few months ago I didn't. And when I think of like all the customers we were supporting, we have a lot of biased customers, I think, that we're using, more advanced tooling. And I think of this challenge of trying to manage this Microsoft 365 environment, managing down to these levels that we're talking about without tools, right? Like how hard that would be. There's just so many things that you have to script and manually work around. And it's getting better. Like SharePoint Advanced Management is a great example from Microsoft, but this was a really surprising stat. And when you compare these two things, right? When you combine the fact that it's the number one concern and number two concern for post migration for maintenance, but we don't have a lot of tools, I think that creates a question of why. Like, what's the budget reasons for that? So I've got a couple ideas there, but I think that's the other key point that came up when we were doing this research with customers. And so,
Curtis, I think you had
go
a
ahead.
question.
Yeah, I have about like 20 questions because there's a lot of really interesting data here. But yeah, I'll try to keep it short and crisp. What's interesting, Richard, is I find that 1% quite surprising also, just because, as we all know, manual policy management across the whole M365 ecosystem is a bit of a challenge. There's a lot of tools that are disjointed. There isn't one common good way to manage them at scale. So that's really interesting. What I wanted to ask about really quick, I hate to go backwards, but that you had a really interesting stat about why organizations keep data on-prem, and the surprising contradiction there was 66% maintain their data on-prem for data security and control, yet increased security improvements is driving migrations. Just want to double click on that for a minute. It looks like maybe what explains the contradiction, and let me know if this is true. I think the organizations want control of the data, but they're probably looking for all the security improvements around access governance and detection and all the fortress type stuff that Microsoft 365 offers. Is that sort of your impression, Richard?
Yeah, so one of the sort of related insights, it's a big report, but I'll kind of show it, is this on compliance. So I'm just going to cheat and do a search because I can never remember where half this stuff is. It's a very large report. But inside of the section on security, a related insight, and again, I just didn't know which ones we wanted to dive too deep into, is confidence in Microsoft 365. So remember, these are the same people. So you got this percentage of people who are saying they're moving to the cloud, right? To your point, for security reasons, things like that, and others that are staying on-prem. Well, those same that said they were staying on-prem, what they really wanted was validation, it seemed like. So, there was this question of like, how confident are you? And if we were saying not confident or somewhat confident's a pretty broad term, then what's that risk? And in fact, it was the biggest thing that was driving delays in migrations. So what happened is they would do like compliance is a broad term again, but they would look at like, what's the state of our posture and our capabilities here? What's the state of our posture and capabilities here? And where there was a gap, they would want validation that this was, a non-issue, et cetera, before they would move. And this would create deferrals. There's sort of two major reasons for deferrals for, I'll use SharePoint. For SharePoint migrations would be customizations, right? Like, so these things that make the migration more complex. And then the secondary thing that comes up a lot is, this concern of losing something, right? That from here to here, we lose security, we lose compliance, we lose, the control, whether it's customizations or it's, things like the security layer. And this was interesting because when we dug deeper into this particular set of insights, overall, what we found was that there's this consistent perception that, what we want is this better state, but what we have is worse. So if you reframed it slightly with these same people and you said something like, okay, instead of saying like we need it to be better, if we could just basically prove that it's enabled to be better in this new environment, even if it's not all turned on. Purview is a great example of this, right? So let's say labels and Purview deployment hasn't been done at that document level. but at least it's available. We can start auto labeling. We can start detecting, right, through DPSM, right, like the ability to see the kind of data sets and risks that we have. That would be much better than where we are now, because we don't even have that visibility, right? And I think that particular Purview report is a great example of it, right? Where you could see and contrast, like, here is the gap and here is the risk profile that we wouldn't see if the data stayed on-prem. And so that kind of dialogue, that kind of framing led to a lot of these getting unstuck and moving faster to the cloud, which was this idea of like, hey, is it enabled better here? And do we have highly accessible things that don't require any, special expertise? It's not like I need to invest in partners or specialists or things like that to use DPSM. In my early example for Azure, right? You can do that data protection, security. Like you can look and find these risks, within your environment of PII or other types of file types that are distributed in places that they probably shouldn't be, and things like that. And you get that if you migrate even without the security. So like if you just migrate the data up, right, like a Delta, you'd still have that, because as soon as it gets indexed, right, your Purview capabilities start to kick in and you can start to analyze that. So that was one tactical example, but it's a really good point. Like these are so connected, right? Security, compliance, governance. And when we see one metric like this and data privacy concerns, et cetera, it often leads to us, adding layers of complexity. And, if we can say, hey, it's good enough or it's better than what we have, then that's always like the thing that seems to drive it across.
No, it makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Just adding on to that, I feel like this is maybe a perception thing, because, it wasn't that long ago, I'm going to take a stab, maybe 12 years ago, that there were banks, they're talking to many banks that had all their exchange data on-prem. And they were like,
yes,
hell will freeze over before we move to the cloud, were the comments that I was getting. And now I would say probably all the banks in Canada have their email data in the cloud. So is this just the same thing, or is it a bit more complex in terms of what we're looking at?
There's definitely data. One of the data sets in the report at the beginning of it, again, there's lots of other interesting insights. One of the report insights is this idea of how many people are doing Microsoft 365 tenant-to-tenant migrations versus Microsoft 365, from on-prem migrations. And you can see, like, naturally, you'd expect on-prem to decrease, as people transition over. And instead, what we see is that there's like this big bump, because there's both increased security pressure, and a lot of the anecdotal research we had here was that during the 2024 period, AI wasn't really proven. And so there was a lot of ideas of, maybe we need to move, maybe we don't. And then this push, it seems to be a lot of triggered, besides end of life things, seems to be a lot of triggered migrations due to wanting consolidated data sets, right? We want consolidated data so that we can reason over it with AI for compliance, for security, or for, productivity outcomes. And so I think that's part of it. And because you have that pressure, in a bank, can, of course, needs to do it responsibly, but as that increases the need, there's more and more desire to move more of that data into environments that are, if not in the cloud, more AI accessible, which is modernization, right? Which is migrations. So it's definitely, there's data like this example here that shows that that's in an uptick right now, that there's a acceleration of that in the market. And again, anecdotally, there seems to be a lot of connection between the maturity of AI right now and the demand and understanding of how do we do it safely is starting to crystallize. And that's leading to more and more organizations being like, well, then we need to get more of the data across so we can start to use it when safe and when responsible. So again, these things all kind of combine, but that's probably the cleanest insight I can probably give that would add commentary to that. Yeah.
Hey, Richard, just a really quick follow-on question. Did this report actually show sort of what percentage of organizations have the majority of their data on-prem versus the cloud? Because I guess this is just showing those who are on-prem the reasons why, right?
Yeah, ShareGate is a Microsoft 365 migration organization. So the research was around M&As, it was around migration, it was around Copilot, it was around things like that. The best data we have for that is like the amount of people who still have 2016, 2019. Remember, SPSC has been out for many years now. So sorry, the acronym is SharePoint Service Subscription Edition. So the latest on-prem version has been out for, I mean, arguably 6 years, right? Long time. And 5 years, depending on when you're in preview and stuff. So that's a long period, and customers are still not on that version of on-prem. And so, we know that the footprint of on-prem count is still quite large, but we also know that organizations are under more threat for being a version or two back. And I think that's really the emphasis here is, if we're on the latest Exchange Hybrid, we're on the latest SharePoint Hybrid, SPSE, et cetera, there's risks, but they're not as dominant. And once you get to that point, if you look at the feature sets, I'm just picking on SharePoint here, but all the new enhancements and updates are almost all security based, right? Like I want MFA across and I want, encryption across in this way. I want purview, right? I want labeling to work within, this on-prem container, in this case, SharePoint Service Subscription Edition. And so there's all this stuff that they deliver into that product, SPSC. But again, if we can pull up the report, but the actual updates for what they deliver in there are very like security centric versus delivering new functionality. It's actually really rare that they deliver the new stuff. That's all in the cloud for the most part. And that is extremely accelerated with AI. So what was, a year ago or 2 years ago, historically, you'd be okay, 2 years for not having modern, I don't know, SharePoint sites or something, or not having hub sites. Like, great example, hub sites still don't exist in SharePoint on-prem, right? Maybe that's not a big deal for your organization because it's still newish. But when you look at AI, that exponential curve is much sharper. And so you're seeing this feeling of these legacy systems, these on-prem systems really falling behind. And now you can bring AI into them, but again, is Microsoft as a first party doing that? Not really, right? And for lots of reasons, they can barely keep up with this exponential curve on the other side. So it's a much lower priority to start to bring that into on-prem environments in the ways that we might expect. So again, I think these are all indicators that increase the pressure for on-prem and will shift more and more people to the cloud. But once you're in the cloud, it doesn't remove, some of those discussions, right? How do we secure the container to the, the collections like sites and teams to the document level? But that's my quick thoughts on that particular data.
Yeah, that's great, Richard. I mean, I think we could probably talk a little bit longer about this too. It's just digging deep into the metrics, but I think we'll just end it like that. It was really great insights from you on this particular topic. Hopefully we'll be able to connect again on some other topics that you want to discuss too. And thanks for coming on, and hopefully all of our listeners got a good understanding about, you should move your data to the cloud.
Yeah. And if you're in that environment, in that scenario, even if you move to the cloud, what are those like first steps? Like moving from service to container to document level is important. So the more people are aware, especially of that SharePoint attacks, the better. So people can take those actions, and just appreciate the opportunity to share some insights and kind of get the discussion going.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening in, and we'll catch you on our next episode.
Thanks, Richard.
Take care.